Kano.
Hi there everyone, I hope you are all doing absolutely fantabulous on this fine day. At the time of writing the script for this video, Christmas has finally ended and we are fast approaching the new year of dread and existential crises, where we tell ourselves that this is going to finally be the year for us where we fulfill all our resolutions and achieve our goals, but eventually come to the slow but sad realization that life simply doesn't work that way and that we'll be stuck in this perpetual cycle of entering each new year with shit more or less staying exactly the same for the rest of our lives. Happy New Year everyone, even though it's probably going to be long past by the time I release this video.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Anyway, in today's episode I am once again playing through the Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection, which was released late last year as a remaster of all the classic MK games that came out in the 90s for arcades and consoles. Only this time I'm playing strictly as Kano, which I'm sure you could tell by the ultra clickbait title of this video, which if you hate clickbait, well, you're just going to have to f***ing deal with it, aren't you? It's simply how the YouTube algorithm operates, and since you're here watching this video, I guess you got suckered in already, so you might as well sit back, relax and enjoy the show. Kano's first appearance was in 1992's original Mortal Kombat game, which was developed by Midway Games under the guidance of gaming industry geniuses Ed Boon and John Tobias, as well as artist John Vogel and music composer Dan Forden, who gave us all those awesome soundtracks. Since this very first game featured digitized sprites of real-life actors and martial artists, Kano would be played by American actor and martial artist Richard DeVizio in both the first and third entries of the franchise, as well as the upgraded version of Mortal Kombat 3, namely Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, and Mortal Kombat Trilogy for the Sony PlayStation 1 console. However, he also fulfilled the roles of other characters like Baraka and Quan Chi in other games within the franchise as well. He would also be offered an opportunity for motion capture work in Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. In the lore for the games, Kano is portrayed as a ruthless criminal, mercenary and arms dealer who is the leader of an international cartel called the Black Dragon. He serves as one of the many villains in the story who is solely driven by the pursuit of wealth and power at any and all costs, often siding with the forces of Outworld against his own realm, that being Earthrealm. Kano will even go as far as backstabbing his own allies in favor of whoever's offering the highest price, and is public enemy number 1 of the Special Forces, which puts him directly in the crosshairs of Sonya Blade and Jackson Briggs, with his metal faceplate that covers his right eye being the result of an injury that was gifted to him by Jax in events prior to the first Mortal Kombat game. But it does allow him to shoot laser beams, so he's got that going for him, which is nice.
So I got that going for me, which is nice.
In the original game, he was initially from the United States of America, but after the massive success of the first Mortal Kombat live-action film from 1995, where he was played by Trevor Goddard, his lore was retconned to make him Australian, and he has remained so ever since. Goddard himself would sadly pass away from a drug overdose in 2003 at the age of 40. So now that we have covered the basics of everyone's favorite Aussie video game character, Kano, let's get to explaining that extremely blatant clickbait title before someone attempts to punch me through the screen. Now, while Kano in Mortal Kombat obviously does not resemble the historical figure I'm about to discuss, since, he's white and has an Australian accent, it turns out that he does indeed share half a name with this legend of martial arts, or rather that the dev team at Midway clearly got inspiration from this individual's last name, which is also Kano, or rather as pronounced in Japanese, Kano. Judo is today quite a popular martial art, centered mostly on grappling and basically flipping a dude over your shoulders onto the floor in an extremely violent manner, which may leave them paralyzed if done on a hard surface and if they don't know how to break the fall correctly. This art of tossing a motherfucker on the ground had its start in the late 1800s, when a very obviously Japanese man by the name of Jigoro Kano decided to adapt the age-old practice of folding clothes with a person inside it called Jujitsu into a new style, which focused more on the aspect of forcing someone's face to meet the earth in rapid succession, which he would call Judo, or ironically, if translated directly into English, the gentle way.
Может, как-то бросок какой-то.
So while he would eventually go on to develop a very efficient way of making a dangerous opponent land on his back, leaving him gasping for air as the wind is knocked out of him, it turns out that Kano's family life was actually quite a chill one, being born in the year 1860 to a wealthy family of sake or Japanese alcohol brewers during a period of rapid modernization, as Japan, under the guidance of Emperor Meiji, would begin to shed its traditional feudal and samurai roots in favor of a more westernized society which embraced technological progress. Now, I'm not sure if this bit of information is actually true, but according to ChatGPT or a handful of other articles I found online, Jigoro Kano's family did have samurai ancestry, specifically from a line of Shinto priests called the Shogenji, whose lineage connected to the traditional warrior class of the samurai, though his father supposedly shed this traditional status and chose to become a scholar and a government official in this new modernized Japan, and his family, as mentioned before, were extremely affluent in the sake brewing business, which, regardless of warrior class lineage or not, placed him in a fairly privileged background during this time period. Though despite his possible or not connections to the samurai, unfortunately for him, when he was about 8 years old, he would see his beloved country descend into a state of civil war in the year 1868, when the Boshin War kicked off in full swing, a conflict I've mentioned quite a few times on this channel, which I do plan on making a future video about. But in a nutshell, the Boshin War was essentially the brutal clash that resulted in the end of the shogunate in favor of the new imperial government, where samurai, who were loyal to the shogun at the time, fought tooth and nail against those who sided with the emperor and the imperial army over who should be the rightful ruler of Japan, which up until that point was governed by the supreme leader of the samurai, the shogun, with the emperor being more of a political figurehead. He would again live through the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877, which was a short-lived uprising wherein the remaining members of the samurai class, not being too happy about the fact that their roughly 700-year history, cultural identity and social standing were being replaced by the more modern social changes and Western influence, proceeded to attempt to overthrow the Meiji government, but were unfortunately utterly defeated, thus bringing an end to the long reign of the samurai as Japan's ruling class. Despite living through some pretty significant historical events though, and losing his mother at the age of 9, it seems that Kano's life was fairly stable, and due to his father believing that education was of the utmost importance in this rapidly changing world, Jigoro would end up receiving lessons from Confucian teachers and attending the best schools that the new Japan had to offer, where he would receive a world-class education and later on achieve high academic distinctions at Ikuei Academy, where along with the help of his private tutors, he would become extremely fluent in English and German in the mid-1870s.
I went to an Ivy League college. I was a nice student. I did very well. I'm a very intelligent person.
Right.
Now, because Jigoro was quite short and physically unimposing, and basically viewed as a bit of a nerd by some of the other students at Ikuei Academy due to his highly intellectual nature, he was often the target of bullies who, in typical bully fashion, picked on the smaller kids to give them a sense of superiority. After having his lunch money taken too many times, at the advice of a family friend, Jigoro would develop a keen interest in Jujitsu, an ancient form of unarmed grappling said to have been developed by the samurai in the event of needing to defend themselves without a weapon. It turns out that this family friend, named Nakai Baisei, at the time was a member of the shogun's personal guard, and that after finding out about Jigoro's problem with bullies at school, he mentioned how Jujitsu was an excellent form of physical training, and proceeded to show the young Kano a few techniques by which a smaller man might overcome a much larger and stronger opponent. Seeing a very positive potential for self-defense, Kano decided that he wanted to learn this martial art, despite Nakai's insistence that such training was out of date and quite dangerous. By the time Kano moved to Kasei Academy when he was older, his bullying had pretty much died off completely, but his interest in Jujitsu had not. Initially, his father also discouraged him from learning Jujitsu, as he felt it was too dangerous for someone of Jigoro's size, and as all wonderful and loving parents seem to do, he simply ignored his son's claims of bullying. But after noting the young Kano's deep interest in the art of folding a human body like he would a tablecloth, he allowed him to train on the condition that Kano would dedicate himself fully to it the same way he did with his studies and strive to master it. And thus, Jigoro would begin his long journey to becoming a full-fledged Jujitsu master. He eventually matriculated at the University of Tokyo in 1877 and graduated with a BA in Political Science and Philosophy in 1882. During his time at the university, he started looking for Jujitsu teachers with the specific intention of finding qualified bone setters, who in Japanese were called seifukushi.
日本から来ました。日本から来ました。Japan, I came from Japan. Okay, you come from Japan. Yes, Japan. Now you are a Japanista. Let's take it that way.
His assumption was that doctors who knew the martial art were better teachers, since their day job involved them basically resetting dislocated joints or dealing with fractures. He felt that they would most likely have a vast knowledge of the human body and know how to correctly apply Jujitsu techniques to achieve certain bone-breaking results.
Round 1. Fight!
His search brought him to Yagi Tenosuke, who had been a student of Emon Isomata in the Tenjin Shinyo Ryu School of Jujitsu. Yagi in turn referred Kano to Fukuda Hachinosuke, a bone setter who taught Tenjin Shinyo Ryu in a 10-mat room adjacent to his medical practice. Tenjin Shinyo Ryu was itself a combination of two older schools of Jujitsu that dated back to the heyday of the samurai period, which were namely the Yoshin Ryu and Shin no Shindo Ryu styles. Fukuda's training method consisted mostly of the student taking fall after fall for the teacher or senior student until he began to understand the mechanics of the technique and also how to break the fall correctly to avoid injury, since Fukuda himself stressed applied technique over ritual form. He would start off by giving newbies a short description of the technique and had them engage in free practice or randori in order for them to learn through experience. It was only after the students had attained some proficiency in randori that he then started to teach them traditional forms or kata. This method was difficult as there were no special mats for falling back then, as they are today, only the standard Japanese straw mats which were called tatami, laid over wooden floors. So back in the day, the bros literally trained in hardcore mode and injuries were quite common.
Now stand aside, worthy adversary.
'Tis but a scratch.
A scratch? Your arm's off.
No, it isn't.
Well, what's that then?
Kano had trouble defeating a fellow student named Fukushima Kanekichi, who was one of his seniors at the school. Therefore, Kano decided to start trying unfamiliar techniques on his rival. He first tried techniques which he had learned from sumo wrestling, which were taught to him by a former practitioner named Uchiyama Kisoemon. When these did not help, he studied more and tried a technique called a fireman's carry that he learned from a book on Western catch wrestling. This ended up working, and after he incorporated it into his own style, he renamed it to kata guruma, or shoulder wheel carry, and it remains part of the judo repertoire to this day, although many of the judo organizations of some countries prohibit this throw in competition judo, and especially at the Olympics, which, as we have seen, tend to have a reputation of ruining things that used to be pretty effective or cool. In 1879, Kano participated in a Jujitsu demonstration given for the then United States President Ulysses S. Grant, which took place at the home of the prominent businessman Shibusawa Eiichi, who today is considered the father of the modern Japanese economy and Japanese capitalism. Sadly, after this, Jigoro's teacher, Fukuda Hachinosuke, would pass away at the age of 52, and since Kano himself was the best among all the students at the school, Fukuda's wife insisted that he take over the school and continue his sensei's legacy, which Kano obliged for a short time. However, he still felt that he wasn't good enough to fill such a big role, and decided to continue his journey as a student of Jujitsu, which led him to begin training with a close friend of Fukuda's named Iso Masamoto, who despite being 62 years old was quite a skilled Jujitsu master. Unfortunately for Kano, however, his time under Iso's tutelage wouldn't last very long, as Iso himself would also pass away in 1881. As the 1880s rolled by, Jigoro Kano would obtain prestigious teaching jobs at some of the top private schools in the country, and would continue to associate himself with and train under various teachers and fellow students of Jujitsu that existed around Tokyo, where he now lived with his family, learning a wide range of techniques from the many different styles and adapting them to his own. Around this time, specifically in the year 1882, Kano also established the Kodokan Judo Institute, where he began to accept his own students who were eager to learn his new style of Jujitsu, which he now called Judo, that incorporated techniques and ideas from various styles, but also from other forms of grappling martial arts like sumo and Western catch wrestling, with his primary goal being to synthesize what he considered the superlative or most effective parts of various Jujitsu styles into a safe and efficient educational method based on the principle of maximum use of physical and mental energy, which became Kodokan Judo. He discarded techniques he considered dangerous or relying purely on brute strength, including many of the original striking techniques from Jujitsu, and this is no more evident than during his time of training with Kito-ryu style master Ikubo Tsunetoshi, who also attended Kano's new Kodokan school. Despite having his own school, Jigoro never considered himself a master who had nothing new to learn, and would always be more than willing to get on the mats with anyone who may have been more skilled than him in order to obtain new knowledge of the martial arts. And so even though he himself was a teacher of his own style of judo, he would be taken under the wing of Ikubo Tsunetoshi in order to learn the Kito-ryu style of Jujitsu and see if he could incorporate it into his own style of judo. Over time, Kano would eventually master the art, and instead of being the one tossed about on the mat, it was he that began to more frequently leave his teacher Ikubo laying on the floor, as he wrote in his own personal diary, and I quote, "Usually it had been him that threw me. Now instead of being thrown, I was the one throwing him, with increasing regularity. I could do this despite the fact that he was of the Kito-ryu school, and was especially adept at throwing techniques. This apparently surprised him, and he was quite upset over it for some time. What I had done was quite unusual, but it was the result of my study of how to break the posture of my opponent. It was true that I had been studying the problem for quite some time, together with that of reading the opponent's motion, but it was here that I first began to apply thoroughly the principle of breaking the opponent's posture before moving in for the throw. I told Mr. Ikubo about this, explaining that the throw should be applied after one has broken the opponent's posture. Then he said to me, "This is right. I am afraid I have nothing more to teach you." Soon after, I was initiated into the mystery of Kito-ryu Jujitsu and received all his books and manuscripts of the school. After this, Ikubo passed on all his knowledge of Kito-ryu Jujitsu onto Jigoro Kano and named him a worthy successor and inheritor of the art and all of its secrets, by also granting him the many handwritten scrolls and text on the science behind the style. And as per his usual methods, Kano would go on to incorporate everything he had learned and discovered into his new art, which he now called Judo, as he wrote in 1898, by taking together all the good points I had learned of the various schools and adding thereto my own inventions and discoveries. I devised a new system for physical culture and moral training, as well as for winning contests. His Kodokan Judo Institute would grow quite rapidly in the mid to late 1880s, going from just a handful of students in the very beginning in 1882 to more than 1,000 members by 1911, and by 1917, Judo became a part of almost every Japanese school's physical education curriculum, but also became far more standardized with regards to competition rules and techniques, as it transitioned from being a martial art to a competitive combat sport. Being somewhat of an idealist, Kano had broad aims for Judo, which he saw as something that simultaneously encompassed self-defense, physical culture, and moral behavior, which is echoed in his own words on the subject as quoted. Since the very beginning, I had been categorizing Judo into three parts: Rentai-ho, Shobu-ho, and Shushin-ho. Rentai-ho refers to Judo as a physical exercise, while Shobu-ho is Judo as a martial art. Shushin-ho is the cultivation of wisdom and virtue, as well as the study and application of the principles of Judo in our daily lives. I therefore anticipated that practitioners would develop their bodies in an ideal manner, to be outstanding in matches, and also to improve their wisdom and virtue, and make the spirit of Judo live in their daily lives. If we consider Judo as a physical exercise, we should remember that our bodies should not be stiff, but free, quick, and strong. We should also be able to move properly in response to our opponent's unexpected attacks. We should also not forget to make full use of every opportunity during our practice to improve our wisdom and virtue. These are the ideal principles of my Judo. Because Judo developed based on the martial arts of the past, if the martial arts practitioners of the past had things that are of value, those who practice Judo today should pass all those things on. Among these, the samurai spirit should be celebrated even in today's society. In 1915, Kano gave this further definition of Judo. Judo is the way of the highest or most efficient use of both physical and mental energy. Through training in the attack and defense techniques of Judo, the practitioner nurtures their physical and mental strength and gradually embodies the essence of the way of Judo. Thus, the ultimate objective of Judo discipline is to be utilized as a means to self-perfection and thenceforth to make a positive contribution to society. And in 1918, when once again questioned on the purpose of Judo, he added, "Don't think about what to do after you become strong. I have repeatedly stressed that the ultimate goal of Judo is to perfect the self and to make a contribution to society." In the old days, Jujitsu practitioners focused their efforts on becoming strong and did not give too much consideration to how they could put that strength to use. Similarly, Judo practitioners of today do not make sufficient efforts to understand the ultimate objective of Judo. Too much emphasis is placed on the process rather than the objective, and many only desire to become strong and be able to defeat their opponents. Of course, I am not negating the importance of wanting to become strong or skilled. However, it must also be remembered that this is just part of the process of a greater objective. The worth of all people is dependent on how they spend their life making contributions to their community and to society at large. So, as history would have it, the very first iteration of the modern Olympics was held way back in 1896, in the very place where the idea of such competitive games originated from in ancient times, namely in Athens, the capital of Greece, with the intention of fostering cooperation and unity among the various competing colonial powers in the world at the time. Which, yeah, that didn't work out so well, hey? Since World War I and World War II followed directly after, and war between competing nations still continues to this day.
Let us promote peace and unity through a global sporting event which I call the Olympics.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
In 1909, Japan received an invitation for participation on the International Olympics Committee from Baron de Pierre Coubertin, the father of the modern-day Olympics. And yes, I probably did butcher his name, but I don't speak French.
Bonjour mademoiselle, j'ai procuré notre soleil, je veux m'en venger, merci beaucoup, je hurle, oui oui baguette, bisous.
Jigoro Kano was chosen as Japan's representative, and he saw this as an opportunity to not only promote Japanese athletics, but also to hopefully have his now fully developed martial art of Judo gain some global prestige. However, as much as he was extremely passionate about Judo, he seemed to have no real desire for it to be included in the Olympics at the time, taking a more passive approach, as quoted in a 1938 letter to Gunji Koizumi, who promoted the art in Britain. I have been asked by people of various sections as to the wisdom and the possibility of Judo being introduced at the Olympic Games. My view on the matter at present is rather passive. If it be the desire of other member countries, I have no objection, but I do not feel inclined to take any initiative. For one thing, Judo in reality is not a mere sport or game. I regard it as a principle of life, art and science. In fact, it is a means for personal cultural attainment. Only one of the forms of Judo training, the so-called randori, can be classed as a form of sport. In addition, the Olympic Games are so strongly flavored with nationalism that it is possible to be influenced by it. Judo should be as free as art and science from external influences, political, national, racial, financial, or any other organized interest, and all things connected with it should be directed to the ultimate object, the benefit of humanity. Despite Jigoro Kano being the very first Asian member of the IOC, there still unfortunately was no general sports organization in Japan that could send athletes to the Olympics, and of course there were no athletes who could compete at such high levels. Thus in 1911, the Japan Amateur Athletic Association was founded and Jigoro Kano was installed as its first president. At this meeting, it was decided that Japan would participate in its first Olympics at the 5th Olympic Games to be held in Stockholm, Sweden the following year in 1912. This served as the basis for the widespread development of all varieties of sports within Japan. Even after that time, Jigoro Kano continued his work as an IOC member, and because of that position, he was able to travel abroad several times for the Olympics and IOC meetings in the remaining years of his life. He focused all his energy into the internalization of sports in Japan, and in 1938 it became time to reap the fruits of his hard labors, as it was formally decided to hold the 12th Olympic Games in 1940 in Tokyo. Sadly though, on the 4th of May of that same year, Jigoro Kano died aboard a ship while on his way back to Japan after attending an IOC meeting in Cairo, Egypt, where he was able to secure the decision to host the 1940 Olympic Games in Japan. In his later years, Kano had started to suffer from kidney stones, but the cause of death was officially listed as pneumonia. However, other sources listed food poisoning as the cause of his death, which itself led to a wave of conspiracies that allege he may have been murdered by poisoning rather than dying of pneumonia, although there is no known contemporary documentation to support this claim. It is speculated that due to Kano's outspoken opposition to Japanese militarism in the first half of the 20th century, it may have made him a target of the Japanese Showa-era government, since many others who also opposed this violent expansion were allegedly assassinated by the Japanese government during the 1930s and 1940s, when Japan began to aggressively attempt to colonize its many East Asian and Southeast Asian neighbors with military occupation. But as already stated, there seems to be little to no evidence to prove whether this was the case or not, so we are simply left with the mystery of what actually caused Kano's death. At the time of his death, he was 79 years old, and unfortunately and quite ironically, despite securing the 12th Olympic Games to be held in Japan in the year 1940, which was his greatest wish, they ended up being cancelled due to World War II and Japanese military aggression towards other nations at the start of the war. It was not until the 18th Olympic Games held in 1964 that Japan was finally able to host its first Olympics. So while he may not have been able to see his beloved nation represented by hosting the games on the world stage during his lifetime, at least sometime later his dream would finally come true, and despite his sentiments when he was alive, Judo would also be included as a sport in the Olympics from then on. Today, Jigoro Kano is regarded as both a legend in Jujitsu, which has gained massive popularity thanks to televised mixed martial arts championships like the UFC, but also as the founding father of modern Judo, who, through the art of slamming a dude on his back, also promoted the idea of self-improvement and overall positive contribution to society as a whole, since he saw it not just as a martial art for self-defense, but also as a way of life. But aside from being this legendary figure in the world of combat sports, it must also not be forgotten that Jigoro Kano was also a scholar and a teacher who placed a great emphasis on the importance of education and preparing young hearts and minds for the future, in the hopes that someday the educated youth will be the ones to make the world a better place. And with those lovely flowery words, we have reached the end of this week's episode. I sincerely do hope you all learned something and were simultaneously entertained by my terrible attempts at trying to show off even a tiny smidgen of skill playing as Kano from the ever so brutal Mortal Kombat franchise. It's kind of ironic that this violent video game character shares a name with a Japanese judo legend who was largely considered a pacifist and idealist in his lifetime, even going so far as to name his martial art the Gentle Way, despite it not being very gentle in the first place. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to help me conquer the algorithm, and I'll catch you all up in the next one. Ciao!